There we go.
All right. Good evening. It's 5:30 p.m. on Tuesday, February 2nd, 2021, and this regular meeting of the Sandpoint Planning and Zoning Commission is now called to order. For the record, I'm Jason Welker, Chairman, presiding in City Council chambers at City Hall 1123 West Lake Street in Sandpoint, Idaho. Also present here in the chambers are Commissioners John Hastings and Mo Dunkel. Commissioners Tom Riggs and Forrest Shuck are present and participating remotely. Commissioners Kate Huisman and Slade Camp are absent this evening. Are there any general announcements or reports from commissioners?
None.
Nothing.
Hearing none, are there any members of the public participating on Zoom who wish to address the commission on a general matter other than items listed on the evening's agenda? Please raise your hand on Zoom.
Mr. Chairman, there are no members of the public participating yet this evening.
Great, thank you. So to the approval of our meeting minutes from the last meeting. I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the January 19th, 2021 regular meeting.
Second.
Here a second.
Was there a motion?
You moved it.
No, I would entertain a motion. If you would like to
make a motion.
So moved.
Okay.
That's it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes and the minutes are approved. All right, we have a couple of presentations tonight. The first of those is from the Bonner County Airports Manager, David Shuck, who is with us to go over the 2020 Airport Economic Impact Report. Is David with us?
Yes, he is.
Great.
Hello.
Hello.
First thing, disclaimer, I am not an economist. So what I'm going to do is ask first if you have had a chance to look at the economic impact study on both the executive summary for the state and the specific report for Sandpoint Airport.
I personally have not, unfortunately.
Yeah, are we referring to the PowerPoint that was on the?
Yes, I'm going to pull it.
Yes, I have seen that. Yeah, I've looked at that.
Okay, then I would recommend that you look at that. I believe I sent the file to the city, to Amanda and Jennifer, and they should be able to share that with you guys. It's got a lot of excellent information in it. There's two files. One is the Idaho Airport System Plan Update, which basically speaks about the economic impact right there of aviation and airports in Idaho, and somewhat about how they arrived at this, the data that they use, the formulas that they use to a degree. Again, without being an economist, it doesn't make much sense to me. But and then it does, in the last couple of pages, it compares the jobs, earnings, GDP, and outputs of the airports in Idaho. Another couple pages there, Amanda. So this is Sandpoint's, specific to Sandpoint Airport. And it speaks a little bit about the last economic impact study that you can see in the timeline down below, where it talks about the 2008 economic impact. That's the last study that we had data on. And that shows employment of 482 jobs that are not specifically at the airport, but are in support of the airport operations. And then total earnings of $15.1 million and total output of $32.3 million. And when we were first given the results of the study, the current study, I was shocked is not too strong a word, to see the numbers that you see on the right side of the timeline. The 2018 economic impact, total employment 873 jobs, total earnings 51, almost 52 million, and total output of 307 million. So when I saw that, my only exposure to this type of thing for our airport had been the previous study done in '08. And I was befuddled by the tenfold increase in output. So I contacted the people that did the study. The state of Idaho contracts with engineering firms who then contract with specialists that do this type of work. And I asked the question, what happened here? And the gentleman I spoke to, who was one of the partners in the organization, his name is Steve Martin, said that, asked if I was having sticker shock. And I said, yes, I am, because I've got to make this make sense to some people who may be somewhat skeptical, as I am. And he said, well, what we think happened in the previous study, or not what we think happened, but what did happen in the previous study is that they changed some of the modeling that they used to come up with the formulas to diversify some of the outputs. And he gave me a long and complicated explanation of why they didn't do that this time, and why that changed the total output so much. So I said, well, that's pretty complicated for me to explain to the folks that I'm talking with about this, not necessarily you guys. And he said, well, the key to really look at here is the total earnings. That's directly related to jobs, and that's directly related to salaries in the area. So if you look at the earnings, 2008 total earnings 15.1 million, and in 2018 total earnings 51 million, almost 52 million. He said that's a defensible number, an easily understood number, and it relates directly to what's happening in your area. And he said also the other thing to look at is the number of jobs. I mean, you have a twofold increase in jobs that are related to the airports. So I did a little math on this, and if you divide the 15.1 million by 482 jobs, you get about $30,000 on average in what you could call salaries. And if you divide the 51 million by the 873 jobs, you get about $60,000, $59,000 in what would be termed, compensation or salaries, earnings. And that made more sense to me from a scalable standpoint. I've been around Bonner County for a little over 40 years now, and thinking back to positions and salaries and wages that I had in '08 versus what I have now, there's been substantial increase in earnings. I don't know if it's been doubled, but at least in one of my jobs, it was more than that, and the other, it was almost that. So we have seen increases in average wages in Bonner County over the last 10, 12 years. And we have seen increases in jobs related to the airport over the last 10 or 12 years. So those numbers tend to be more accessible to me than the total output, which has to do with all of the money that is spent in supply chains, as well as ancillary businesses and ancillary industries to aviation and airport. And so I think if you were to look at this and say, whoa, those are big numbers, it's true. And I think if you were to go back to, Amanda, if you could, to the state summary, the best use of this data would probably be, I think it's on page 13 in the state summary, 13 and 14, where there is comparisons to the other airports in Idaho.
Sorry, I'm working on it here.
That's all right. It looks like it might be on 6 or 7 in your slides there. Drop one more.
Is that the one?
Yeah, that's the one. And what this does is it gives you a comparison for all of the airports in Idaho. And that's probably one that makes the most sense from the things that you guys have to deal with and the things that we have to deal with. If you look at these numbers, it's a little difficult on this, so I would encourage you to get the PDFs and go over these numbers when you've got a little more time to look at them. These are using the same formulas, same ideas, same models for each of the airports. And we rank in earnings. I believe we are 4th in the state. Sandpoint Airport is. In jobs, we are down a ways. There's when you're looking at, Boise, for instance, and Haley, these are all the commercial service airports at the top of that list. They should have, pretty substantial earnings and GDP and outputs. And looking at our output, we are actually second only to Boise. And in GDP, I believe we are, I'm just looking at this again, at 306 million, 307 million. We are third. Yeah, third. That's largely because of the businesses we have at the airport that are strictly airport related, that are selling very high dollar items. For instance, the Kodiak aircraft. Kodiak selling 25, 30 airplanes a year at $2.5 million per. That's a pretty easy number to come up with in terms of what we're talking about here. And if you start looking at the supply chains and the earnings for the people that are working at all around here and the induced costs and the inferred values, it gets pretty substantial pretty quickly. The challenge that you guys will have and we all face is how do we protect the airports and keep that economic engine operating here in our town? And the biggest thing that you guys would run into in your capacity here would be land use compatibility and the challenges that we have around the airports. As you guys know, some of the last open land in Sandpoint is around the airport. And a lot of it's been zoned industrial, and I understand you guys are getting a lot of pressure to change zoning to accommodate more residential, which is obviously a need in the area as well. The challenge that we run into is in keeping the economic impact of the airport high and attracting more businesses, can we retain some of that land for those industrial or manufacturing uses versus having it converted all over to residential, which the struggle you have obviously is with developers who value that land and with the need for reasonably priced housing in our area. Those are the numbers and the takeaways that I have from these studies. I would, like I said, I definitely recommend that you look at them, especially the comparators to the other airports around Idaho, because those numbers are the ones that are direct comparators and make the most sense to me. I anticipated that there would be questions. I don't anticipate what they might be, and I can certainly, I had a little bit of short notice in putting this together, so I can certainly touch base with the people that ran this study if you have questions, and I can relay them to them and come back to you again at a later date, or just send the information to Amanda and her crew to disseminate, whichever you prefer. Any questions?
David, is Sandpoint's airport unique in the number of employers, companies that participate in the aviation industry directly adjacent to the airport within Idaho?
Relatively unique. Coeur d'Alene has a fair amount of business that's directly related to the airport. There are no other major airframe manufacturers in Idaho. There's a couple of smaller ones down in southern Idaho that work out of Nampa. But Sandpoint has probably the largest employer in terms of manufacturing airplanes. The operations in Coeur d'Alene are more maintenance related, maintenance and refurbishment related, which may not carry the high dollar values that manufacturing does.
The land that's currently zoned industrial adjacent to the airport, do you predict aviation related industries being attracted to that land in the future? Or are there other industries that are particularly compatible with the airport and the value that it offers?
I would say both to a degree. The value of the land around the airport that's airport related would be ancillary businesses to the manufacturing and research and development businesses that are already there. If we could bring more suppliers to the manufacturing facilities in this area, you can solve some serious logistic problems, and that's very attractive to both the supplier and to the customer. So I would say that the value of the land around the airport would be in support of the existing businesses, and the possibility of creating what we were terming 10 years ago an aerospace mall, if you will, with the current businesses being the anchor stores, and then a bunch of other strip malls and small supporting businesses coming up around, like for instance machine shops and manufacturing facilities that support build parts for the bigger aggregators, if you will. Anyone else?
Yeah, I have a kind of a general information question. And I know early on when we were looking at some of those issues that came up with specific requests around the airport, there was some concern that any of those changes might in some way impede upon the airport's ability to get federal dollars or other sorts of funding in order to maintain or upgrade the facilities. Is that an ongoing concern?
It is. That's probably the greatest ongoing concern from the airport's ability to continue to have access to federal funding. The FAA has strict guidelines about land use compatibility, and residential, and particularly high density residential, are particularly problematic from the FAA standpoint. The airport is a noisy place, and that's probably the biggest complaint that we hear even now, with the amount of use that we have right now, and the residential areas around the airport, and actually some not even around the airport. I had a call last week from a recurring citizen who was complaining about airplane noise over the city at noon on a weekday in the winter. And I say it like that because quite often we get complaints, noise complaints from in the springtime, when people are spending, coming outdoors, getting rid of their cabin fever, spending more time in the nice weather out in their yards, which is exactly the same type of time that pilots want to go flying. So you see a lot more pilot airplane activity around the airport, and then that's when I typically get the most complaints about noise. But we've had more and more complaints even in the off season. Like I say, the middle of a business day in the winter, when the airplanes are operating in, fully legally in what they're doing, it's very difficult for us or you to do anything about that, even though it is having a negative impact on some of the folks that live near the airport. But from a grant standpoint, yes. From the ability to further fund the airport, yes. Land use compatibility is the biggest issue. And we've had some recent, as you guys know, some recent changes and challenges. And the FAA is aware of that, and chimed in on that. And I wouldn't say we're totally on their radar, but we are on their radar, and they do look at those things when they consider funding applications. And I don't say that in a manner that is, I don't mean it to be threatening at all, but the FAA has a limited amount of funds and an unlimited amount of demand for improvements on airports. And they have to weigh each application for grants against all the others. And when the community surrounding the airport is supportive of the land use compatibility requirements and understands the value of the airport, it's a lot easier for them to put millions of dollars into that community and that airport than someplace that maybe isn't as accommodating in terms of land use compatibility. Because they have to make, like I said, they have a lot of demand and not much supply, and they have to answer to their oversight committees about why they would select a given airport for scarce funds.
Are there some current land use incompatibilities around the airport now? From the FAA's viewpoint?
Yes. And the reason I hesitate when I say that is because I think we're at a point here in Sandpoint that if we did not increase residential population densities around the airport, we would probably be okay. If we continue increasing those densities around the airport as we have been, it's going to be harder and harder to get grant money. And I would love to be able to give you guys absolutes on this sort of thing, but it's not an absolute type of answer. There's a lot of judgment that goes into it on the FAA's part, and a lot of competition for those funds. So I can't, definitively say if you change the zoning on that parcel, it will affect us from a grant standpoint. It could, is all I can really bring to you.
Thank you.
Again, I would encourage you guys to go to the, get the PDFs from the city or go to the state of Idaho, the Division of Aeronautics. This information is there as well. And they do talk a lot about land use compatibilities. And as you know, the comp plan has to consider that nowadays. So I think we're headed in the right direction. And that's the message that I send to the FAA when I talk to them about these things. I think we have, having you guys engaged and interested in understanding what's going on is a huge step. So they view that positively. And I think we're, like I say, heading in the right direction. They understand the challenges that we have from a residential needs standpoint. But their goal, their responsibility is the safety and security around the airports. So they understand the challenges. They just have their marching orders.
Any other questions from commissioners?
Not for me.
And I don't think there's anybody participating from the public. So I think we will thank Mr. Shuck for your presentation. I am really interested in this report. I'm going to look a little bit more closely at it when I have some time. And it was very well done. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Yeah. Have a good evening.
You too.
All right. The final item on the agenda tonight is an update on the multimodal transportation plan. At this time, I will yield the floor to Infrastructure and Development Services Manager Amanda Wilson for her presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And good evening. Our presentation this evening is focused around multimodal transportation. The good news is you will not be hearing much from me this evening. We actually have a whole team of consultants on board and online with us that will really be the bulk of the discussion tonight. Let me see if I can get my mouse to go here, maybe. Oh, I think, sorry, the screen is, there we go. So I'll go ahead and start off with an introduction and then kick it off to our team here. We're going to go over a bit of background on our multimodal transportation plan, as well as what we've accomplished to date, work that's been that's currently underway, some of our outreach and engagement efforts with the public, and then really focus tonight on the goals and objectives. With that said, although tonight's presentation is primarily focused around this plan, you do have a lot of resources with us tonight that you are encouraged and welcome to ask questions about transportation. I know we've had a lot of recent discussions about the urban area transportation plan and kind of its role and how it meshes with our code and comprehensive plan. And so I just wanted you to kind of have that option to, as we work through specifically the goals and objectives, that might be a great opportunity to kind of have some of those deeper dives from our past discussions. So with that said, why are we doing a multimodal transportation plan? We actually kicked off the concept and priority in the 2018-2020 strategic plan adopted by City Council. This was specifically one of City Council's initiatives. And its fundamental purpose is to provide a practical implementation strategy for enhancing safety, connectivity, accessibility, and mobility, really for all users. And that planning period is a 20-year timeframe. So as we've discussed in the past, the urban area transportation plan was a little bit different. That specific plan is a document that incorporated 4 other jurisdictions within the area. And it was initiated in 2007, as the slide shows here. It was actually adopted in 2009. This plan is specific only to the city of Sandpoint. And when it is brought forward to council, the intent is for it to replace or supersede the urban area transportation plan. The reason I focus on that is when we're bringing forward applications to you, we're often referencing currently that urban area transportation plan in that staff analysis, because it does serve per our code as one of the design standards. So we're going to talk tonight about kind of what's included in this plan. Similar to the urban area transportation plan, it has a lot of components. And one of those components is capital improvement projects, where our team really takes a look at what are the issues in town and how should we go about fixing them. That's one major component of this plan. And that effort is substantially based upon a lot of community outreach. The other component is kind of more that focus on the back end, if you will, of the urban area transportation plan currently, where we get into some of the standards of when do you need a trip generation distribution letter? When is a traffic study required? And then what do we do with that information, right? And so that's kind of the other piece of it. Last, but arguably maybe first, is the goals and objectives. So similar to the goals and objectives that we assess when we're looking at a comprehensive plan, the intent would be that the transportation goals in some form and fashion mesh with that overarching comprehensive vision as well. So we're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive tonight. I just wanted you to know how this all relates to what you are faced with and the decisions that you're faced with on a regular basis. And the last piece I will say is that I think as we move forward with this plan, your input is hugely valuable. You really see, I think, the results of some of these plans that we go about trying to adopt. And so I would just encourage you that now is your chance to speak up if you think you see something in the plan or in the draft that you would suggest that we take a closer look at or modify. I would really encourage you to do that and reach out, even if it's not tonight, if it's as we continue through this effort. So with that, before I turn it over to the team, I do want to introduce everyone on the line really quick. So we have Mandy Roberts. Mandy is our project manager with OTAC. Mandy is a licensed landscape architect in the state of Idaho. She's down in Boise now. And she has been doing multimodal transportation planning for 25 years plus. So really enjoy her expertise and her leadership that she's shown in this planning effort that kicked off actually at the end of, it was November 2019 when we started this effort. So it's been a really, really wonderful process having her on board. We also have on the line with us, as you guys may remember from our other meetings, we have Preston Stinger. He is a sub-consultant to OTAC, and they really work hand in hand and seamlessly on developing this plan. Preston is not only serving in the capacity of the city's for a traffic engineer. He is our traffic engineer that we send our analysis to and trip generations to review, but he's also intimately involved in this effort with the transportation planning hat on. So he really takes a deep dive into a lot of the data and the engineering component that goes into this. So also on the line, we have Darren, who you have met in the past, obviously, our interim planning director. He is on the line with us. And then our city engineer, Dan Taddick, is also online with us. So you have a whole team of experts, like I said, ready to answer any questions you have. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Mandy.
Thank you, Amanda. Good evening, commissioners. We're really glad to be with you tonight. First of all, I want to say, don't let the licensed landscape architect thing scare you. You're probably going, why is a landscape architect working on our multimodal plan? I just want to let you know that I have worked in planning for decades, and I have AICP certification, and I guess most familiar to you might be some of the work that we've done in McCall and Twin Falls, Idaho, but I've also worked pretty extensively in the Pacific Northwest and across the country in transportation planning and for the National Park Service. So I've been doing it for a while. I'm just a landscape architect because it's kind of fun to be one. But I will say that we've never put a plan like this together during a pandemic. And so that has been probably one of the most interesting aspects of the last year, is working on projects where we really have to consider how to get engagement and get people involved when we have also safe social distancing practices in mind. So we've worked hard on that. We've had a lot of engagement, as the slide shows. We've been working with an agency coordinating team that includes representatives from ITD and the county and the railroad and other folks. And we've also had a community steering team that represents, more stakeholders from community sources. So that's been great. And they've been kind of a key touchstone to us throughout the planning process. We also distributed a public survey back in December of last year and received several, I think about 200 and some responses to that, which was very insightful and helped inform some of the problem areas that we looked at, as well as some of the solutions that have been identified. We've done a lot of analysis of existing conditions and mapping. We've done a look ahead for the community called the Trend Lab study that we did with Farron Peers, where we really looked ahead and thought about things like automated vehicles and changes in how people park and ride share and those kinds of things, and how that might affect planning decisions. And then we've developed draft vision goals and objectives for the plan, which we'll talk about in a little bit tonight. I think I can turn my own slide, maybe not, thank you. We've had a number of really productive focus group sessions. We met with a group that we've named them the Trucking Coalition, but include a lot of people that are involved in industry and trucking activities, people from salad dressing. I'm sorry, it's in my refrigerator. Their name is escaping me. You guys
Lighthouse.
know.
You're good.
Thank you, Lighthouse, yes.
Slate's not here tonight.
Okay, good, thank goodness. And other folks, and really kind of readdressed how trucking routes should be handled throughout the community, and trying to really emphasize routes away from downtown. So that was really important and vital. We worked with, we brought some students in and did some youth engagement, thinking about the transportation system and how it should serve their needs. We looked at some pedestrian focused analysis, pedestrian priority network. We've got that defined. And then also we did some origins and destinations. And Preston, do you mind just jumping in a little bit and giving a snapshot of what that work involved, the O&D analysis?
Yeah, you bet. So the origin destination analysis utilized data from cell phones and GPS that had traveled through the area. And this was pre-COVID times that we were able to pull data for over a year time period over the year of 2019. And what we were trying to understand is what is the distribution of trips coming in and out of town, both from the north, south, east, west, and also what percentage of those are cut through or pass through trips that don't stop in town, that just pass through. So that's kind of the overarching goals that came out of that.
Yeah, Preston, would you mind continuing on and just talking a little bit about the key intersections analysis and the safety audit work?
You bet. So the operational analysis, we looked at several key intersections. I would say, maybe a half dozen or so key intersections that we know have some problems, or at least have some concern from what we heard from the community as well as what we heard from the city. And some of those are on First Avenue, around the Bridge and Church area, Superior, several along Pine. And in addition to those, and when we say we analyze, we look at the traffic counts going through those intersections and address how they're operating, and what the grade level of that intersection is, based on what we call a level of service grade. And if there are issues, then we start to look at some recommendations, which we'll talk about here in a bit. And then we also did, kind of as a separate but joint project together with this, was a road safety audit through a grant process that the city went through with LTAC and ITD. And that involved looking at division from Michigan up to Cedar. And actually we went further up to the elementary school as well for a little bit further look at the corridor. And that looked at some observations at different times of day, mornings, evenings, middays, nights, to address what some of the safety issues are along that corridor, from all modes of transportation, from vehicles to pedestrians. And, how does it feel to walk, drive? What's the data showing us from a crash perspective? And then after all that, we had an audit team that consisted of various community and public organizations here that assisted us in this as well. And then we came up with some recommendations, and that report's been done and will be presented to City Council tomorrow.
Thank you, Preston. Yep. So just kind of moving along, we've got a lot of work that has occurred over the fall and into the winter, and really trying to get it wrapped up, get the plan wrapped up here within the next few weeks. But as Amanda mentioned earlier, some of the key components that are coming together are project recommendations that eventually could fit into the capital improvement plan that the city has, as well as looking at solutions at kind of a concept level for certain areas, downtown, Highway 2 corridor, and then coordinating with ITD to get their input on these solutions, in particular, the Highway 2 corridor and some of the ideas that are starting to formulate there. So next slide. There we go. So we are gathering public input on some of the ideas that are going into the plan now. We had a great meeting last week where we presented some information related to some of the downtown ideas and First and Superior. And then this week on Thursday, we're going to be looking at the results of the safety audit and recommendations for division, as well as the pedestrian and bicycle network recommendations. Next week, we'll be looking at the Highway 2 corridor and the Baldy Mountain extension and presenting that. And thank you. And then we have a website that is available for people to go in and review the concept plans and provide input on those directly in case they're not able to attend the meeting. So that's great to have that opportunity to gather input. And we've got visuals and boards on display at City Hall as well of these elements. So next slide. Unless there's anything. Yeah, go ahead, Amanda. Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, you're great. I just wanted to make sure the commissioners knew that if you just go to our main website page on the news section, there's a link that's what's shown on the screen here, and that takes you directly to all of those concepts and the I call it a blog, the interactive platform where you can comment on it. So
Great. So that really brings us to the goals and objectives, which we wanted to take a little bit deeper dive in with you all tonight. And I think we'll review the goals, but then have some discussion about those and answer questions. Amanda, does everyone have those as a handout? Do you want me to show those on screen or anything? Or oh, there you go. Okay, very good. Excellent. Okay, so we have several goals, and let me just explain kind of how these have developed. A lot of these are based on extensive input from the two committees that I mentioned earlier that we were working with, as well as input from the public. We've presented these in draft form multiple times to the public and gotten input. We also worked with the comprehensive planning team when they were moving ahead to integrate these goals and objectives with what they were doing. And most recently, we also just took a look at the urban area transportation plan from 2007, 2008, and looked at bringing in some of those goals and objectives as relevant. So it's pretty comprehensive for a multimodal transportation plan. These are also written in a way that is very consistent with how comprehensive plan goals and objectives are written. So this fits nicely in with the city's comprehensive plan framework. So I'll just kind of go through each goal very quickly, and then we can pause, and we'd really like to get your comments and talk to you guys about this. Goal 1 is a balanced multimodal transportation system. And this really differs a little bit from maybe the goals you might see in the urban area transportation plan, in that we're looking at all modes effectively and really balancing how multimodal transportation access can benefit residents, commerce, visitors, and people of all ages and abilities. And we're really thinking, we hear this time and time again, Sandpoint is a walking town, it's a pedestrian town, you have it on signs as you come into the town. So really thinking about pedestrian needs as a priority in this plan has been part of our work. And then of course, bicycles and vehicular movement of people and freight. So let's, I think, scroll to goal 2. There we go. We've also heard a lot about resiliency and sustainability in the community, and of course, livability. So this goal is kind of attempting to pull all of those things together, and also looks at minimizing impacts to the community and the environment with transportation solutions. So recognizing you guys live in a very beautiful, natural, surrounded by nature, lakes, mountains, and understanding that the transportation system has a role in carrying people to those places, but also needs to be thought of in context with the environment and the surroundings. Okay, goal 3. Can you scroll? Do you want me to scroll to goal 3? Thank you.
No, it's okay, there's just a little bit of a delay, sorry.
Oh, got it. No, that's fine. And then, as has already been the case with the city, requiring ongoing proportionate mitigation related to traffic impacts from new development is also a goal that we recognize. And, developing procedures to minimize negative impacts and protect transportation facilities and corridors and sites during development review. Goal 4 relates to access management. And access management, particularly on highway and arterial corridors, can be a way to keep traffic flowing efficiently on those corridors. So it's a really important tool that we often look at as transportation planners. And it's usually done incrementally over time, but it's looking at things like sharing driveway access, limiting turns in and turns out from the highway, and locating driveways and access ways on the cross streets rather than on the highway. So this is something that can happen over time, but it also plays a key role in keeping traffic moving efficiently where you need it to move efficiently. Goal 5 is a walkable and bikeable network throughout the community. And so we have done a lot of thinking about this and knowing that, it would be hugely expensive for the city to try to improve walking and bicycling on every single street, even though ultimately that might be what the community wants to do over the long term, over the next 20 years of this plan, 10 to 20 years. What are the priority routes for walking and bicycling citywide that really need to be improved first, where the gaps need to be filled and intersections need to be improved and whatnot? So we've really taken a close look at that and identified, with the community, some routes that, should be the priority for improvements over the next, over the planning horizon. Okay, goal 6. So downtown is pedestrian friendly, and that characteristic is really important in supporting the economic development of downtown and the thriving businesses that you have. And so this goal is just simply saying, let's continue to support and enhance downtown as a vibrant, pedestrian friendly year-round district with a walkable network and parking that supports access to businesses, shops, restaurants, and other destinations. And by the way, one of the recommendations of the plan is to conduct a parking study that looks at parking capacity and utilization in downtown. Okay, goal 7, region connected by trails and pathways, that you are. And this just basically says that the plan and proponents of the plan support implementation of the region's system of trails and paths to create a well-connected region, enhancing interconnectivity and access for all users. Okay, goal 8 is strong multimodal connections to the waterfront. This came up multiple times as a suggestion in the planning process, in particular places like City Beach and places along the water where people want to get to and from, but maybe there might be, traffic congestion and issues with those areas. So how to make them more bicycle friendly, maybe more transit access to these locations. Also looking at the water systems themselves as transportation routes. So just putting some acknowledgement to that as an important part of the transportation system is what goal 8 is about. And goal 9 then moves on to look at the role of transit and in particular passenger rail for the community. There's a lot of potential for growth and really leveraging or increasing the effectiveness of transit in the community. And so we have had SPOT folks involved in our planning process, and the city would continue to partner and work with them to make sure that the multimodal transportation system supports transit. Plan for future needs in key corridors. So there are obviously key corridors. Division is one of those that Preston just talked about, that have a lot of needs for multimodal transportation improvements. Highway 2 and how it configures its way through downtown is another key corridor. The Baldy Mountain corridor and the potential to extend that to the highway to the east is another one. So this goal is just recognizing how important it is to support those key corridors and their needs. And let's see, goal 11, we're almost there, is of course, proactively pursuing all funding opportunities. And, there is the anticipation that there will be some infrastructure funding coming from the federal government. State funding continues. Just being on the lookout for all partnership funding and grant programs that these projects might be eligible for is what we're talking about here. And then the last goal, goal 12, is about innovation and cooperation and just continuing to work together, which Sandpoint is really doing a fantastic job reaching out to the partners in the region and really kind of being a leader in coordinating and cooperating and how transportation can be advanced, not only in Sandpoint, but in the connecting region as well. So I think with that, Amanda, we might want to just maybe go back through each goal and just take some comments on each. I don't know how much time we have. I don't have my clock now. Let me open it up here. Yeah, what's the how much time would the commissioners like to spend on this agenda item from this point forward?
I think, going through each goal and seeing if anybody has questions is totally fine.
Okay.
I don't think we need to necessarily set a time limit.
Okay.
Just see how it goes.
Thank you so much. So let's talk about goal 1. Thoughts on that, and hopefully you can kind of read the objectives on the fly, which provide a little bit more detail surrounding the goal.
Any questions or comments from the commission?
I don't have goal 1.
Goal 1? No? Okay, shall we just move on then to goal 2?
Sure.
Resilient, livable, sustainable community and how that relates to transportation. Any thoughts or suggestions or comments on that?
Did you have a working definition of sustainable in this context?
Well, yeah, it is a little bit double duty on the definition. So in this case, we're talking about a transportation system that's easy to maintain and operate and care for as that definition of sustainability. But there's also reference to the environment and the importance of sustainability related to the environment in this goal. So it's kind of double-sided here.
I'm wondering what is the time horizon on which you're working in terms of, when we do our comp plans, we think in 20 years in the future. What's the time horizon for the multimodal plan?
Yes, that's a good question. So it is a long range plan, and the outside date or horizon would be 20 years, but we're also looking at short-term and mid-term recommendations in terms of projects. So short-term would align with, kind of a capital improvement planning timeline of perhaps 1 to 6 years, and midterm might be 7 to 15 years, and then long-term would be 15 to 20, something along that, although we haven't really defined the specific years yet. We'll be doing that shortly, but that's kind of the general thought.
I ask because I just thinking of current events in the news just this week, US auto manufacturers making announcements like they plan to have no new internal combustion engine cars within 15 years. So if we're thinking in a 20-year horizon, have you considered the need for electric car charging stations in town? We currently have 1 place to charge an electric car in Sandpoint.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
Mandy, is this an opportunity to maybe have Preston take a little bit of time to talk more about that trend analysis? Because we had a really great workshop on that very question.
That's an awesome idea. Preston, do you mind talking about that a little bit more?
No, not at all. So we had a workshop almost exactly a year ago, and had numerous people in the room to discuss this. And the point of the Trend Lab Plus workshop is really to get people thinking about what are the current trends and how are trends going to change in the upcoming years, and how does that affect how people travel, and eventually how does that change how we may make some recommendations in the multimodal transportation master plan, or how we address things in goals wise to make sure we can address it that way in the future as things change. So we had people vote on different categories of things related to private vehicle ownership. What percent of the population owns a private vehicle, and do we expect that to to change into the future. And we have data based on what that currently is, and then individuals would vote on how they felt like that would change in the future, if at all. We talked about densification and mixed use, if land use would continue to densify in the city or not, because that does have a big, the miles traveled by vehicles and the number of trips taken by vehicles changes pretty drastically based on densification of land use and complementary types of land uses in terms of mixed use. And then we talked about how vehicle miles travel, in other words, miles traveled by a vehicle changes based on the mix of autonomous vehicles in the mix of the fleet out and about. And again, that's autonomous vehicles have great things in terms of reducing greenhouse gases and some of those things, but they also have some disadvantages of traveling, making more trips, I guess I should say, because they, depending on if they're driverless and they're just circulating around waiting for the next person to hail that ride, or if they just drop a person off and they go back to their destination, their home, for instance, that's double the trips that it would have been if someone just took their single vehicle there. So we talked about that. We talked about the bicycle and pedestrian environment, on how comfortable it was to walk and bike to most places in town, or if it was not comfortable, and how that would change in the future. We talked about transit service, and if they saw general improvements in convenience and efficiency and reliability of transit, or if they saw significant improvements coming, or about the same, or a decrease. And we also talked about TDM strategies. TDM stands for Transportation Demand Management Strategies. And that's really about a suite of strategies that exist or could exist to help reduce vehicle trips. And this could relate to large employers or could relate to core town. And we talked about proportion of retirees, because that also plays a role in how many people drive. And we talked about the proportion of driving age population, as the trend has been that people are waiting longer to get driver's licenses. Probably back when we all were getting our licenses, that was the first thing we were doing when we turned 16. That's not the case anymore. People are waiting longer and longer, and if at all, to get driver's licenses. And how is that affecting how people drive and traffic volumes in and around town? Other things we talked about, I'll just flip through these other ones: household incomes, goods and service delivery, and how that will affect the area, social networking, and how that plays a role in how people travel. And then there's forecasts out there that there are nationwide forecasts on how vehicle miles traveled will change into the future, looking at 25 years down the road. And each kind of organization, jurisdiction on a national level has a little bit different perspective on how that will change. But in our workshop, based on how people voted here in this community, we forecasted how that would look for our town, and so that was the gist of it. And then Mandy and I have been working on what does that mean in the grand scheme of things in our multimodal transportation master plan. And in general, most people felt like the trends that are currently happening today would generally be about the same, maybe a slight increase in those trends, to the point where you wouldn't see a drastic change in increase in miles traveled or a large decrease, but it would kind of stay on the steady climb that we're on.
Great, thanks. Any questions for Preston about all of that great work?
I have a question on that, and that was most of that part of the study at least was done a year ago. That would have been just before the trend to a lot of telecommuting for workers. And I don't know what the impact to Sandpoint would be. Are those more people going to move here because they can work someplace else? Or the people that already live here going to work from their homes more? Do you know what, do you have any finger on that pulse that's going on?
Yeah, it's a good question. I wish I did have an answer for that. A lot of that's still up in the air on how it's going to shake out. It's, a lot of the tech industry in the Bay Area, for instance, is already saying, hey, we're not going to come back to work, or at least to the level that we ever were, and are allowing their employees to move to all places, including Montana and Idaho and Utah and Arizona and so forth. And you see large population increases there and decreases in California for that reason. But there's other places that are saying we are just waiting for the time to get back to normal, and things will go back. Maybe not to the level of 5 days a week, but maybe 3 days a week, and there's 2 days of telecommuting. So I don't know for sure what the answer is on that. I believe that things will change in that realm, whether it'll be more acceptable and conducive to work, at least some extent, telecommuting. So I think we'll see a dip in that trend of miles traveled in that direction for the good. Looking at big data, these cell phone companies, I guess these not the cell phone companies themselves, but these companies who purchase this data from the cell phone companies, scrub the data, and then let us buy it from them to use it in transportation studies. What they're seeing based on cell phone data is that traffic volumes are about back to where they were pre-COVID, but and that's total over the day, but they're seeing them more dispersed throughout the day. So instead of having your high peaks in your morning and your high peak in the afternoon, it's more evenly spread throughout the day. But if you look at it in a total, it's about the same as it was before. So it could be that too, that instead of having your high peaks in the morning and afternoon, it's now more dispersed throughout the day.
Preston, if I can just chime in there with a kind of a follow-up question to that. When we looked at our origin and destination analysis, and we've had quite a few conversations with our committees about, some of the uniqueness with Sandpoint as far as being a regional hub, right? And so you have that component, meaning we definitely have this key focus on pedestrians and bicycles that is absolutely valid. But we also have this, sort of surrounding area that is commuting into Sandpoint and coming here to, eat and shop and those sort of things. Can you kind of speak just a hair about that and how that factors into it, as well as the fact that we are a destination city and kind of in comparison to some of the other places you've worked in that regard, and how that may shape it, I guess.
Yeah, Sandpoint is unique in that it has a heavy tourist-driven traffic that comes during certain times of the year. And that is, I guess that's not unique to a resort kind of town, similar to a Steamboat or Park City, Aspen, those kind of places. That's not unusual. The part that may be a little bit more unique to Sandpoint is the amount of pass-through traffic that does happen, because in those other resort towns, that town is the destination. Whereas this, while it is the destination, there's also a large amount of background traffic that is just utilizing the highway system that's either going right through the middle or just on the east side of the boundary of city to get through. And that's, depending on what roadway we're looking at, we're talking about almost half of the traffic coming through on some of these roadways being passed through and not ever stopping in town. And that's particularly of interest of US 2 that goes right through the middle of town, that 40% of it is pass through that never stop to get gas, get a bite to eat, shop, or live. And I think that definitely sets Sandpoint apart, that's a pretty high number. The other thing is, as far as distribution and things go, it's pretty evenly distributed to the north and south. It's about a third of your traffic goes north, about a third goes south. in terms of origin destination, whichever way you're looking at it. And then going west on US 2, it's about 10%, and then going east through Pend Oreille and up to the northeast is just under 20%. So that kind of gives you an idea there. Now about tourists and how they affect your traffic patterns, that's a big deal. You know, it's a little bit sleepy maybe in the winter months, and it gets crazy during your summer months. And I know Mandy and the team has been working hard on how to address those things. That how do you address something that's only an issue 3 months out of the year? And are there things we can do on a temporary basis that maybe aren't in play in the winter time? And I think you'll probably see, because that's been the trend throughout the nation as far as resort towns go, I think you'll start to see that peak in the summer become more evenly distributed throughout the year as well, which I know Aspen and Park City, for example, I have seen that in the last 10, 15 years, a strong shift to summer, not shift to summer, but in addition to winter, a summer peak. That wasn't the case before for them. It was very high in the winter. So I could see with ski resort being close to us here in Sandpoint, and maybe incentivizing some tourism type things in the winter time here, that could shift as well. And people are maybe looking to travel there. So that could be, I don't have anything to back that up. That's just my observation, having worked in a lot of resort communities over the years, that you may start to see that shift to winter as well. So some of these recommendations should be more permanent, not just during your summer months. Anything else you want to touch on there, Amanda?
No, that was great. Thank you.
Okay, well, I think we might want to move on to goal 3 now. Any comments regarding traffic mitigation as a goal? It's pretty standard for the plan.
Actually, I had a question on that, and that was the mitigation all appears to be oriented towards trying to minimize vehicle congestion. Could there not also be a goal, should there not also be a goal to mitigate some of the other negatives from that increase, such as carbon that is being released, other pollutants that are in that exhaust? Noise might be another one. Goals for mitigating those negative impacts as well.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that's really a good comment and kind of inherent to traffic and the issues surrounding traffic. This impact fee is meant to, I think, this impact program is meant to provide a basis for traffic impact fees, which then are dedicated to transportation improvements. But Preston, do you have any insights on the comment or anything you might share for that?
Well, I would say if air quality impacts are, definitely a hot topic around the world, and especially in our country, and if that's of interest to the city to have specific wordage to, mitigating air quality impacts from greenhouse gases related to traffic, then I think that's definitely something we can discuss, because that's, if that's a goal, as Mandy mentioned, it's kind of inherent to traffic mitigation. If you're trying to reduce trips, by reducing trips and vehicle miles traveled, you're also reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And so it's just a matter of, do we want to add some language in there? This goal specific may not be super relevant to that, because this is about adequately making sure the developers are kind of paying their fair share towards trip mitigation. But that inherently does help with reducing greenhouse gas emissions as well. So it's really, what does the city want to do as far as language that way?
Yeah, I could see adding an objective kind of around in that vein, reducing greenhouse gas emissions carbon footprint. So I think we could work on something like that. Amanda, what's your thought on that?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. I also, I think the timing when it comes to our comprehensive that we had been talking about a bit before, there is and Darren knows this intimately as well and is welcome to chime in. I think we'll be taking a deeper dives, but not that it can't go in this transportation plan, and there is a nexus there. I'm completely tracking with you. But I also think that when we take a closer look at our comprehensive plan, there is a whole section to that end, and I think that we need to take a closer look at it. What I appreciate about your comment is, our goal is worded in a way, require proportionate mitigation. The mitigation, just to be candid, has really been mitigation and cost. I don't really, and correct me if I'm wrong, Preston or Mandy here, because I certainly don't want to misstate it, but development applications that have been coming to us, we haven't been mitigating the number of trips, right? The way we have done that, potentially one could argue, is within our zoning code of trying to balance, encouraging bike parking and some of those types of offsets, if you will, to mitigate the actual vehicular trips. This particular goal, Mandy, is spot on. It's more about cost implications, right? So if they're going to have so many trips that now our intersection is failing and we got to put in a signal, it's about capturing some of those costs. But to your point, it's kind of a broader mitigation.
Yeah.
And I was thinking more along the lines of Mandy's other career there, and that is the landscaping side of it. Is that what creative landscaping can be done to improve air quality and to mitigate noise factors and things like that.
Yeah.
Darren, if you're on there, can you kind of speak a little bit to the zoning side of that as well and some of our standards that we have related to that integration?
Yeah, so, I mean, the plan is obviously your high-level hopes and dreams for how you want your city to look in the future. The ordinance is how you get there. And so I think it's appropriate for the plan to establish this vision. The really interesting part gets to be where we incorporate the zoning provisions to try and implement the vision of the plan. And that's really, not to make a bad pun, but that's where the rubber hits the road. And so if it's, this section is very much focused on impact fees, and we're constrained by what the state statutes will allow us to do with regard to impact fees. And frankly, I don't think we can do anything with carbon specifically, other than, trying to reduce trips. And when you're trying to reduce trips, how do you do that? Basically, you build a community that makes walking and biking and transit the easiest way to get around. Because what we know about the transportation system is that when we make it easier to drive, more people drive. So if you go to, build a more robust transportation system for our vehicles, that is the kind of system that you will get, and that will be the default method of moving around. Whereas if you make it easier to move around by bike and by transit, you start to see those trend lines over time within your city. And Amanda, I apologize if I'm not answering the question here. I'm getting on my little planner soapbox like I like to do. If you want to redirect me, please feel free.
No, thank you, Darren. Does that help?
I have a question. How is this plan going to reinforce our intent to encourage, or more than encourage, I'm looking for that, of this grid type street pattern with new development?
Well, we do have a goal. A couple of objectives actually that mention that. So as Darren just described, this is the place where we want to express the community's aspirations. And so if you look at the third bullet point, it says with new development projects, encourage design and construction of local streets to improve multimodal connectivity and safety, and encourage well-connected grid-type street patterns with new development. So this is the goal, or the objective of the goal, and where that needs to really be further guided is with the zoning code and ordinances that are adopted.
And of course, this is very context specific, and as the commission well knows, when you see a specific application come in front of you, you run headlong into the conditions that we face on the ground. And it might be the existing street pattern, it might be the location of other land uses, it might be natural hazards. But we can certainly put more strict language in the zoning ordinance that would require those things, like the imposition of a grid street pattern on the ground. But we always have to have a measure of flexibility to respond to what the local context is when the applications come in. And I just caution you that it's never going to be wholly satisfying, because you're always going to see applications that are, don't fit the ideal for one reason or another. And so we're constantly in the public realm trying to, make trade-offs and compromises that get us to the vision while acknowledging the real world constraints that we face.
I think, I'm so sorry.
I don't see, I haven't seen a project, and I don't see how a project would come about that would follow that. Just the trend is just absolutely against that. And to me, it's almost like we're putting it in there, but we all know it's not going to happen, because there's no teeth to this, and the zoning has the gray area of, there's ways around it. So I feel like it's a good idea, but developers or applicants for subdivisions and projects are just, they're not in the frame of mind to build more streets because of the cost. And so I'm not sure how that would happen, especially with this, if it's just a goal, but we have no, I just don't see how it's going to happen.
I think the piece it would be maybe good to hear from as well as Preston. It's a conversation Preston and I've had on multiple occasions as we're kind of looking at these different traffic analysis and the layouts, as well as Dan. And I think, because I hear you genuinely, this goal, what I fear, for a lack of a better word, is an applicability of a one size fits all. So I'm wondering if, Preston, you might be able to talk about, within a subdivision, the grid type street patterns and where grid type street patterns make sense, and how that does or doesn't fit with this notion of arterials and collectors, and where those are appropriate in connecting those, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'll try to talk around that. So the grid network of a street grid network is just a series of vertical streets and a series of horizontal streets making up your grid. And by having a good grid system, you are dispersing your traffic through multiple ways and multiple routes, so that you don't have a large amount of congestion at one particular area. And as we know, idling in one particular area has impact to air quality, as well as to delay and congestion for motorists there. So by having a grid system which is appropriate in all areas, not just in the core of town, but all of town, cul-de-sacs are great for one purpose and not great for all transportation purposes. And so from to tie this back into the land use side of this. And, you know, this is a transportation master plan, multimodal transportation master plan that provides us the goals and objectives. It's kind of the big picture. And we got to have this in order to get to the next step of giving things teeth. The master plan is not meant to necessarily give you teeth to put it on top of the developers to make them pay their fair share. That's not the purpose of the master plan. That's where some policies come into play. That's where TIA, traffic impact assessment or analysis studies, those guidelines come into play that the city has, and you know, probably need to be updated here sooner than later. But that's really where the teeth comes in. That gives the city the ability to hold developers to the fire as far as addressing their impacts. And you know, right now it's maybe a little bit difficult to assess that, but that comes with time. We got to do this part first with a master plan to then get to the next part of giving some policies some teeth. Because without the goals and objectives, it's hard to back up that other side of it. I skipped over the street hierarchy part of it. So with your grid system, there are streets that have higher capacity streets, are meant to be higher capacity streets, and those are your arterials. Those are essentially the lifeblood of your street system. They're meant to carry more traffic. Connecting into those, you have your collector streets, and those are kind of the next level down. They carry not as much as arterials, but more than local roads. And then below there, collectors, you have local roads, and those are more your residential neighborhood streets that tie into your collectors. Collectors tie into your arterials. So that's kind of the hierarchy of those. You don't want to have a whole street system of arterials, massive streets that carry lots of traffic that make it hard to walk and bike around. That's not the purpose. And the collectors are meant to be a little more accessible from an access standpoint, and carry a little bit more traffic. And the local streets are meant to have a lot of access and not carry quite as much traffic. Is that, I kind of danced around your question, Amanda. I hope I got there.
If I can ask a follow-up or perhaps just comment on that. It seems like that arterial collector local model in a way is designed for the sprawling suburbs of America, not so much for the small mountain towns of the Northwest where we are. And my fear is that once we've identified more than one arterial in Sandpoint, it really prohibits us from allowing the kind of development that's articulated in our comprehensive plan. So the traditional street grid system, which is what we have in the area around downtown and south of Highway 2 in Sandpoint, and actually all the way up to Baldy Mountain Road, north of Highway 2. Once we've overlaid this arterial and collector road model on everything north of Baldy Mountain Road, it makes it almost impossible to encourage or to require the traditional grid system that our comprehensive plan articulates and that we've actually identified in here. So what I'm afraid of is what we've already seen here, is that developers for the last few pieces of developable land in Sandpoint are going to point to our urban area transportation plan and our multimodal master plan as a reason why they can't do what our comprehensive plan and our city code requires them to do, which is develop in a way that reflects the traditional neighborhood character of Sandpoint, which is what we want for the rest of Sandpoint. But it seems like this plan and the urban area transportation plan will make that impossible on the last remaining parcels of developable land in Sandpoint. And that's, to me, that's a conflict that I see in this plan with our comprehensive plan and with city code. And if all future subdivision proposals that we hear point to this plan as why they can't build roads that are described by our comprehensive plan and by our city code, then that's a problem. So that's a concern I have. We've already seen it this year, last year, and I anticipate to see it again.
Great comments. Thanks for that feedback. I'll just touch on a couple things there. So arterials, while we are classifying them as an arterial, we are only classifying them as an arterial based on what traffic they're carrying or expected to carry. They are not roadways that we're saying we're gonna make church an arterial because we want to. That's not the way it's done. It's done based on how people are already traveling those roadways, what the how those roads are built. Are they already built in a way width-wise that, and that's really probably incentivizing people to travel the way they are traveling on those, and then where they are placed with spacing. You know, generally you're not going to have two parallel arterials a block away from one another. That's just not how it works. But it's really the trips and the traffic that's dictating what's considered an arterial and what's not. It's based on volume, and that can change as if there's something that's a collector today, and with some additional land use that comes into play in the next 10 to 15 years, and there's an update to this master plan in 10 years, and maybe traffic increased by 15,000 on that road because of XYZ developments that came into play, then at that point, whoever's updating the master plan would take a hard look and go, wow, this is carrying just as much as Boyer. This should probably be another arterial in the city. And that's natural growth as the town continues to grow. No matter what the development is or land use is, you know, whether it's a bunch of residential that comes into play or a bunch of commercial or industrial, it's all about the trips. It's not necessarily where those trips are originating or ending.
Are there roads in Sandpoint, forgive me for not being totally familiar with which roads are all arterials, in the traditional neighborhoods that are considered arterials, Division, Boyer, Lincoln, are these roads considered arterials in the current urban area transportation plan?
Mandy, do you have a copy? Did you put that map together with those?
Yeah, I don't know if you have that handy, Amanda, but the classification system. But yes, there are arterials and collectors as well as local streets throughout Sandpoint today. And we do have a classification map that's.
So my follow-up is understanding that there are roads in the traditional neighborhoods of Sandpoint that are considered arterials, it seems plausible that traditional neighborhood design is compatible with arterial and collector roads.
Yes.
But I once heard an engineer say that if we had it to do again, we would never have driveways on Division Avenue. And I say, well, thank God we don't have the chance to do that again, because I would hate to see Division lined with plastic walls like we're going to see in future developments. So my question is, in the future, why do we have to impose a new model that was not imposed when Sandpoint was developed originally, that is inevitably going to result in the kinds of neighborhoods we don't want?
So Preston, if I can jump in here for a second, and I am looking for the map as I talk, because I remember the comment about division, but just to clarify, we don't only have, we have arterials, but we also have collectors. So collectors, if you'll recall, is kind of that middle realm. And so for example, Boyer, the portion that is south of Cedar, if my memory is correct, I'll have to look up the map, but after our last conversation, we took a look at that. That is considered a collector. So, and then as you work your way south, it becomes more of a local road, right? The further south that you get. The more north that you get, that's where it becomes the arterial, because it's interconnecting with major collectors and other arterials. It kind of ends up being sort of that vein. So the comment about division specifically is, I think, an area where Preston could kind of talk about when we have driveways off of an arterial and even collectors, quite frankly, the safety concerns that we end up having there, and why, in fact, the results of our safety audit that we just did, kind of what the conclusions were to that effect, and why a statement like that was made, because there are inherent challenges that come with having the condition that we have on division. So Preston, I think division's a great example since we just did the safety audit there.
Yeah, and Amanda's exactly right about the conflict side of it. So we talked about how arterials have less access in terms of number of driveways and connection of roads on it, because it has a specific purpose of moving traffic more efficiently, and being the lifeblood of the bigger network in those areas. So yes, if ideally an arterial would not have driveways to private residences on it, that does not always happen, but that as the town continues to grow, those begin to go away into the future. I'm not considering, you buy up houses and take all those driveways out right now, but that's kind of the natural progression that streets go down, that as traffic continues to increase because population increases, and there's certain roads that carry the brunt of the traffic, but there's, with the great street network, grid network, things are dispersed, so maybe that gets pushed down the road years and years and years. But it's really about the conflict. You don't want to have a driveway every 100 feet on an arterial. That's against every philosophy that street has, its purpose. And with every conflict comes safety issues, and that's what we're trying to reduce. And an arterial doesn't have to be, I know you're concerned about the neighborhood side of things and being conducive to what the city really wants in neighborhoods. Having sat in your planning commission talking about those developments on Boyer, I understand where your concern is, and I get it. I'm there with you as far as wanting an area that's very walkable and has great access for bikes and pedestrians. That's what the whole point of these goals are that Mandy just walked through. That's not what we're trying to get away from. At the same time, we got to accommodate all modes of transportation, and we got to facilitate that with the hierarchy and size of streets that are needed to move the traffic in those areas. That doesn't mean that we're going to have every street, every block be that. That's not the reason. And in this case, it so happens that Boyer, where that development is an arterial, and we need to limit access there as much as possible. And that's why we have the spacing criteria and those kind of things. And that does not mean that you can't have good pedestrian and bike facilities on those either. Having some good multi-use paths next to it and having some nice landscaping and buffer areas, and you can have nice boulevards and those kind of things to help facilitate those kind of neighborhoods you're shooting for. But by having a complete street network that's just local streets, neighborhood streets, would not get you where you think you want to go, I guess is my way of saying that. That will create lots of conflicts, lots of congestion, even with a grid network, because the local streets have an X number of capacity that can carry traffic. And even though you're dispersing those along, as your population continues to grow, you're filling up all those roads at about the same level, and there's no relief to go. And with the conflict, you're introducing some safety issues that are contradictory to what we're trying to achieve.
Preston, I think really briefly, I think one example we have of that in town, which I know you're very familiar with, the commissioners is so South Sandpoint, I'll call it Southeast Sandpoint if that's a thing, where we currently are struggling with cut-through traffic. So people coming off of Superior, they enter the traditional grid pattern, right, of Southeast Sandpoint, just so that they can avoid the congestion or perceived congestion that's downtown. They don't want to be in that confined area, so they're cutting through. The Superior intersection is in our top 3 priorities by the community. That grid system, they don't want all those trips there, which is why, kind of to Preston's point, and sorry, I should just let you answer the question there, Preston. The end result of putting all those trips into a traditional grid pattern, I don't want to be extreme, but it backfires. And people end up wanting, it's like water, right? They want to find the path of least resistance a little bit. So Preston, I hope I didn't butcher that too much.
Isn't that the failure of an ulterior though?
Arterial.
Arterial, yeah. People are using another street because the street that is in the intended route is not adequate.
That's such a great point, because it's not adequate because it's currently being treated as a grid. We don't have a collector or an arterial. So part of the proposal is actually to make Pine Street the arterial. But what happened is when we tried to revert our downtown from one-way to two-way, we decided to chop off a block between 4th and 5th, and we hindered what needed to be an actual collector or arterial. So the recommendation going forward in this plan is to fix that and make it exactly what you're saying, is a pass-through so that the vehicles are trying to follow the intended path and avoid the conflict in the traditional network. So that's what
But we're comparing almost a highway. Like, this is, that is an, coming off of the Long Bridge essentially, off of like our most major road in the area. That is not a good comparison to Boyer. It is not the same, in my opinion. Looking at that map, there is no place where there can be a grid system put in with a new development, by the standards that this plan, the goals, the code, everything, it does not allow a grid system anywhere. So I think my question, and maybe somebody else's question too, is that why is that in there if we've just explained every reason why there can't be a grid system? Although Sandpoint proper is proof that grid system works. Because every arterial road fronts a grid system. Every collector fronts a grid system at some point, and it works. So I feel like it should not be in there, the goal of having a grid system, or something should change as far as a grid system can work in these areas that supposedly we're being told that it can't work. But I don't agree. I totally disagree with all of this. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Well, it does. We've heard we've heard Preston talk about the importance of spreading traffic out over more streets, and we have lines in our city code that encourage 300 to 600 foot blocks, but the developers get around that by saying, well, there's an arterial here, so we need a half-mile block and now we end up with a situation where there's no roads going out onto this arterial except one. So every household in that neighborhood ends up on one road. And how is that improving traffic exactly? We've abandoned the grid system for a system that's going to funnel more cars onto fewer roads because of the arterial designation of our major north-south throughway in Sandpoint. So I don't understand how we can say in this plan that we want to encourage grid systems when they're incompatible, and developers love this plan because it gives them an excuse not to build more roads. So I don't know. I agree with Mo. I think we need to take that out or rethink. I don't know. Maybe this isn't something we need to discuss
Well, you're not
right
going to
now.
solve it all tonight.
No, I know we're not going to solve
So
it. We should probably
let's
move on.
move on to the next
I agree.
objective, where you're going to be here till midnight.
But just know that we as the
I
planning and
think
zoning
you have
anticipate,
voiced your concerns
we anticipate this is going to be,
appropriately.
there's conflict between the comp plan, the multimodal plan, and the desires for encouraging certain types of development in the future.
And I do appreciate the feedback genuinely. That is exactly why we wanted to have this conversation. I think it is worth us having continued discussions, and I agree with Fonda. We may not solve it all tonight, but I think we need to take your feedback and really take a hard look at it, and how can we adjust this and or better explain what we're trying to get at here. So I will pull up the other goals.
Well, and I'd like to add to that, while she pulls that up, I think it is very important, since you are the first line of evaluating these applications, to know what you're thinking as it relates to these different plans. And these applications come before you in more of a workshop setting, and where your frustrations and your concerns are. Because the goal here moving forward in this collaborative effort is to try to fix some of the problems that we've seen most recently, and try to minimize as much as we can some of the conflict between the code, the comprehensive plan, and then the transportation plan. So, I mean, I don't want you guys to feel like there's resistance to what you're saying. That's what this is for, because you're that first line of evaluation.
And I think it's important that city staff knows that these are our concerns as the commission, because you're the ones who are going to be working with developers. And I'd hate for you to work for 6 to 10 months on a development proposal for it to come before us and us all to be turned off by it, like we've seen. So.
Enough said.
Yeah.
But that's very fair.
Okay, well, I'm wondering if we still want to go through each goal individually, or if we should just continue to take comments overall related to all of them. How would you guys like to proceed?
I think most of us have either looked at it or have it in front of us, and we can, I can scroll through and just see in the next couple minutes and maybe let the other commissioners do the same. And
Okay.
if any questions come up, we can address those. Does that sound good? Okay.
I had a,
Yeah, go ahead.
while you're scrolling, I had a question earlier, that was, and I don't know, I have no idea how this would actually be carried out. But are there other places where we have looked at actually separating the pedestrian and bike pathways from existing streets? Meaning that they're an entirely different pathway so that our pedestrian and bike traffic is completely separated from our vehicular traffic. I don't know if it's feasible in Sandpoint at this point. I've seen it in other towns as they plan forward, if you will, but.
Yeah. Well, I think what you typically see is kind of a healthy mix of safe places to walk and bicycle on street, as well as separated paths. I can't think of a place, and it would be really non-standard to have completely separate bicycle pedestrian facilities from the street network. Of course, if you're in Holland or something like that, where there's so many bicyclists and pedestrians on the street and not very many vehicles, then then that's a different perspective. But you know, what we really advocate for is creating safe streets that work for everyone's needs, street rights of way, because those are public resources in your community. You know, street rights of way take up 25% of your community on average, and you want to use those for all purposes, not just for moving cars. So it's a great resource if it's used wisely in terms of making sure you have pedestrian and bicycle access in those areas. And then you guys are fortunate to have some really great regional trail connections and the ability to continue to extend that, you know, between communities. So that is important as well. And in some cases, there are things like cycle tracks that work well on certain streets that don't have a lot of driveway conflicts, that you can look at separating a bicycling way as a cycle track in certain corridors, you know, or just separated paths. But most of the time, we just don't have the luxury of having the land for those separate rights of way. So you really want to use your public street rights of way as much as possible for everybody. I hope that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, it does. And as I said, I didn't know how it might possibly be pulled off. You know, it's nice where we have the abandoned railway right away. That makes for a nice separation. But that's obviously a very unique situation as well.
And Sand Creek. Sand
And
Creek's a
Sand
great
Creek,
way to get to
Yep.
Monterey.
It is.
Right.
That's,
I mean, it's kind of still following the public right of way of the byway,
Yeah.
but it's still.
separate, completely
Yeah.
separate. Yeah.
Has there been any coordination between this plan and the Parks and Rec Master Plan as far as making sure that everybody has a easy access to a city park? I don't know if you've looked at the location of parks and how connectivity with parks works.
Yes, we have, and in particular, we've been taking kind of a deeper dive into that as we define the pedestrian priority network, making sure that it does connect to the parks, and you know, that basically all parks and schools are connected and part of that network. So we have looked at that.
Great. Are there any other questions from commissioners? Comments?
I do, even though we're dragging it in, my apologies. I'm just curious if at any point, you know, kind of this was combining things that had come up under goal 6 and goal 12 with a pedestrian friendly downtown and innovation. And again, I'm not the professional, I don't know how it'd be pulled off, but are there areas where we have ever looked at making them vehicle-free? Where it would be purely pedestrian?
We have some long-term ideas about how to create, a pedestrian exclusive area between really at First and Bridge, between First and Church. But that's a really long-term objective. And one of the things that we're always really mindful of and careful about is the importance of parking and traffic to business and economy. I know it sounds counter to what you would think for a pedestrian-friendly downtown, but there have been so many places in the 60s and 70s that have tried to create pedestrian malls and exclusive pedestrian ways. And what has happened is it kind of creates these really inactive areas in their downtowns that have, caused the businesses to die, and then there's inactivity and crime. So really the best situation is to have all modes kind of working together as much as possible. One kind of good example of more pedestrian exclusive area I can think of is like the Pearl Street Mall in Boulder. It works pretty well, but it's still some of those businesses on the mall in between the cross streets tend to struggle a little bit because they don't have the constant visibility and access of traffic going through. But there are other places like Sacramento tried to do a pedestrian mall decades ago, and really the downtown really took a hit for that. So I think it can be done well. A more recent trend, quite frankly, that we're seeing a lot, and that our firm has designed several streets like this, are what's called festival streets or shared streets, where you can you design the street block or multiple blocks to be used as a pedestrian plaza or festival space for market space. And you can basically close that area down on a Saturday or a special day, use it for that activity, but then, through the rest of the week or during business hours, it functions as a normal street. So I think, again, kind of in keeping with what I said earlier, trying to get as much use out of your public rights of way as you can is really a great idea. So, but doing it in a well-designed way that's safe for everyone is the best way to go.
Just a comment on that, pedestrian only, I've seen it work where it was only at certain times of the day, like in the afternoon or evening time, and like maybe on the weekends, like you said.
Yep.
And it was really popular because everybody was prepared for it, and it wasn't like, you could never get a car in there or delivery or anything like that. So I think that's an idea worth looking at. Or
yeah, that makes sense.
Any other comments or questions? Forrest, Tom? Nope. Okay.
Nothing.
Anything else? Okay. We really appreciate you guys. That was a great presentation. And just like with all this other master planning that's going on in the city, this is super impressive and comprehensive, and just a lot of knowledge and expertise being put towards this project. So thank you guys very much. And we look forward to hearing or seeing the final version of this when it's ready.
Thank you. Thank you for your input. It's really helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
thank you,
I
guys.
assume there's nobody from the public who would like to comment.
No, Mr. Chairman, no one attending from the public.
Okay. So I think that's it for tonight. With no further business before the commission, this meeting is adjourned at 7:18 p.m.